Our ism for the month of February is atheism. Atheism, A, without, theos, God, ism, a systematized set of precepts that culminate in a body of belief. From the start of this discussion of atheism, I'm going to give you the punchline right away. Here it is. If you miss everything else that we talk about during the next half hour, remember this. No one is an atheist because the evidence supports their belief. No one. The Bible makes that clear. Atheism is a choice. Usually a choice that has been birthed not in the intellect, but rather in the emotions, and we're going to examine that. In the spring of 1984, I got saved. You all have heard my testimony. I grew up in a nominally Christian home, meaning Christian by name only. I grew up in a nominally Christian home, in a nominally Christian town, in a nominally Christian generation, where even though there were few true believers, there was still a general respect for God and the church. That was common. We knew, even though we were nominally Christian, not to make fun of certain things. A few months later, when I graduated, though, I headed off to college. For the first time, I ran into true atheists there. Never seen one in my life. At the time that I entered college, my university was ranked nationwide as the most conservative campus in the country. We were referred to as the Harvard of the Midwest, and were the primary target of recruiting for the nation's largest and most powerful Fortune 500 companies. I became involved with Campus Crusade for Christ. It was an interdenominational college ministry where we had 500 students involved with our ministry, and it was considered the model crusade ministry in the world. Josh McDowell, anybody ever heard of Josh McDowell? He was a leading Christian apologetist at the time, and he referred to at a national conference to our staff from my campus as being willing to charge hell with squirt guns. We had a great ministry. We had a great campus. It was conservative. It was God-fearing. With all of that conservative and Christian influence around me, though, nothing prepared me for what I was about to run into as a psychology student at Miami University. It was there that I ran into my first real atheist. And then I ran into another. And then I ran into another. And then I ran into another. They were all professors under whom I had to learn and for whom I would have to perform, often being put in a position where I had to choose between a good grade by regurgitating what they wanted to hear, or by sticking to my own convictions and expressing what was morally and factually right. It often cost me, but initially this dynamic caused me to have some real concerns that I saw other students wrestle with as well. Some won that wrestling match and some lost. My concerns were these. The guys that are the atheists are very well-educated men and women. They have their PhD next to their names, and they have been hired by the university to prepare the next leaders of our society to take over. Not a light task, not something that you hand off to morons. The punchline of my concern was this: how can men with this level of intelligence and with this level of education be wrong? They would say there is no God. Maybe they are right. To make this concern worse, the majority of professors seem to agree on this issue. This conflict was good for me, though, because it forced me to consider their lines of reasoning, their styles of thinking, their approaches to social interaction, their rationale for believing what they believed. And in short, this was going to prove to be my Toto moment in life. Anybody know what I mean by that? Remember in the Wizard of Oz, everybody's scared to death of this wizard. He's big and loud and scary and breathes fire and all this stuff. And all it took was a little dog who has the brain of a dog to run behind the curtain, to peel the curtain apart, and all you see is this weak little old man who's using a bunch of tools at his access to scare everybody. Once the curtain is pulled away, he's no longer scary. Well, I had that experience because I started to ask questions and I saw that my professors just couldn't answer them, or they would respond to them not with viable answers, but with emotion. They would get angry. It's like, who are you to question the great and powerful Oz? Well, after a few years of working with and sometimes fighting with my atheist professors, I realized that their hardcore commitment to there being no God was evidentially unfounded. There's no substance to it. And it was a choice that they had made for reasons we're going to discuss in a moment. Now, our scripture memory passage for this ism and for February comes out of Psalm 14, 1 through 4. You can see that at the top of your paper. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. Left to our own devices, there's not one of us that will do good. Foolishness is not reserved for the low of intelligence. Anyone can be a fool, including those guys with the PhDs by their names. And according to this verse, it belongs to those regardless of IQ who say in their seat of conviction, in their heart of hearts, that there is no God. Now, the question then is, why would someone do this? If God has made himself evident to all, and none have an excuse, and we know that everybody knows in their heart of heart that there is a God, why would someone in their heart of heart then say that there is no God? There's always a reason. And what I want to do is propose that there's a step-by-step process by which this thinking develops. So let's start with step 1. 1 Corinthians 2:14 says, the natural person, this is someone who has not been changed by the Lord. This is someone who is left completely to their own natural devices. The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness, or they are folly to him. And he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. In this passage, Paul makes a distinction between the natural man and the spiritual man, which comes later. The natural man is left to his own devices, which have all been corrupted by sin. The doctrine that we talk about a lot of total depravity or universal depravity does not believe that man is as bad as he can be. Don't let anybody try to mislead you there. But rather that man is infected and corrupted by sin in all of his capacities. There's not a piece of man that has not been corrupted by sin. Spiritual, intellectual, emotional, physical, and so on. Thus, the natural man is unable to process spiritual truth accurately and perceives things established and taught by God as silliness, as foolishness. The spiritual man, on the other hand, has been inhabited by God's Holy Spirit, has the mind of Christ, and views those things that have been established and taught by God as brilliant and as wise. That's what separates the natural man from the spiritual man. Now, notice that in this passage, nothing in this verse appeals to intelligence as a criterion for accepting or rejecting the things of God. It's got nothing to do with intelligence. So what is the criterion for accepting or rejecting the things of God? That's where we get into step 2. And notice as we read through this, none of this is going to appeal to the intellect. Ephesians 4:18 through 19 says, they are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God. Let me clarify that a little bit. This word life is not bios life. It's not biology. It's not the physical aspect of life that stops when you die. What this is referring to is Zoe. That's the Greek word, and it means spiritual life, life that only God can give. Alienated from Zoe, or that life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them, now catch this, due to their hardness of heart. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity. Let me read that phrase again, because that is at the heart of all this. Why are atheists atheists? They have given themselves up to sensuality. In just one chapter later in Ephesians, we'll see that the flesh, which is the home of our sensuality or our senses, wars against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh. They're at war with each other. Of course, someone whose heart has been hardened because they have unreservedly jumped completely into appeasing their senses and are greedily practicing every kind of impurity is going to view the things of God as foolishness. This makes sense. The flesh that they are feeding regularly and heartily and that wars against the spirit is the force that is being nourished if they do this. Of course the flesh is going to win that battle and the spirit's going to lose. That gets us into step 3. Now what? Proverbs 14 says, "The house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will flourish. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is destruction." When it talks about there's a way being or seeming right to a man, it's talking about natural man. There's a way that we think is naturally right to go, but God identifies that as leading to destruction. So when this happens, when the way that man chooses, which is contrary to the way God instructs, the result of that man's choice is destruction. And when we want to do things a certain way and we don't get our way, what do? We throw a fit, like a little baby, right? The older we get, we just find more sophisticated ways to do it. That gets us into step 4, Proverbs 19:3. "When a man's folly brings his way to ruin," it doesn't say that he takes responsibility for it. It doesn't say that he repents from it. When a man's folly brings his way to ruin, his heart rages against the Lord. He blames God. My atheist professors were the most intelligent and educated men I knew at the time. They were also an extraordinarily miserable bunch of people. I couldn't understand why those who I perceived as having it all, so I thought, were such an angry, cynical, condescending, socially abrasive lot of folks. They were a mess. Romans kind of puts it all together right at the beginning in chapter 1, where in Romans 1:18-32 it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men." Let's think through this. You got natural man. Things of the Spirit are foolishness to him, so he's going to do that which he thinks is right. There's a way that seems right to a man, but it only leads to destruction. When that pathway leads to destruction, who does man blame? God. And when he blames God, what do? You eliminate God so that God can't be responsible for anything in your life anymore. So, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. If you're sinning and you're experiencing the wrath of God, oftentimes you sin more and you sin harder, hoping to satisfy yourself. And if that doesn't work, you move on to bigger and worse sin. 4, what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. Okay? So, they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. They didn't respond properly. What they do is they respond improperly. They became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened, claiming to be wise. Now, think about the professors that you're going to have in college. Do they claim to be wise? Absolutely. I've got a sister, I've got a brother-in-law, they're both professors. They've been working in that world forever, and I've seen it. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. Not my sister and brother-in-law, just the people that they work with. And they exchanged the glory for the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, and birds and animals and creeping things, or in our modern day vernacular, in numbers and atoms and lectures and textbooks. If you listen to an atheist try to explain the origins of the universe and the order we see around us without backing themselves into a corner and attributing the creation of those things to things we cannot test, you've got them. The atheist would argue that their God, they might not put it in these terms, but their God is science. And according to science, you can only believe that which you can test with the five senses. The problem is that statement that the only things that you can know are those that you can test with your five senses is not a testable sentence, right? So their entire belief system is built on faulty underpinning. Billions of years, billions of miles, and chance are the pantheon of today's atheists who have attempted to erase God as being the source of all things. Verse 24, therefore, God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie. They took the truth about God, which is good, and they exchanged it. And in return, they got something that is a lie. And instead of worshiping the creator of the universe, it says that they worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. This is how we end up with what is called naturalistic humanism. Everything has a natural explanation to it. There is no God to interfere or to involve in an explanation. The creature here refers to anything earthly that is living. So rats are creatures, worms are creatures, and believe it or not, you are creatures. It could refer to worshiping animals as gods, like we saw in Egypt, or it could refer to elevating a person to a level of worship. We also saw that in Egypt. Or it could be worshiping yourself. You and I are creatures, and believe it or not, we worship ourselves very well. Amen. We expect circumstances to be convenient for us, do we not? For everyone to be impressed with us and nice to us, right? And when they aren't, we get upset. Adults all over the world expect to be, in this sense, worshipped and adored. The expectation that no one would ever be mean to them, that no one would ever die on them, that they would never get sick or experience tragedy, is their belief system. And when it happens, like I said before, they throw a fit. They throw a fit like a small child, and they tell God in a variety of ways, I'm not talking to you. I want nothing to do with you. Leave me alone. You don't exist. As I stated before, when I would see someone who had demonstrated a long commitment or a strong commitment to Christ turn away from God, we talked about this before. I worked with college students for a long time, and I would see a college student get heavily involved with the ministry. They would go around telling everybody about Christ. They changed their life around, or they allowed God to change their life around. They're into it, and then one day, bam, they're gone. And they want nothing to do with the ministry anymore. They want nothing to do with their walk with the Lord anymore. And I used to try to reason them back into a right walk with the Lord by asking them questions and finding out what caused it. And I went through that enough times that I realized that the same thing causes this response every time. And I stopped asking them questions, and I stopped trying to convince them otherwise, and I just said, who are you sleeping with? Nailed it 100% of the time. By asking that question, what I am doing is acknowledging that their departure from God is not because the evidence changed, but because they're doing something they don't want to stop doing because they know it offends God. Instead of giving it up, they give God up, and they make him disappear. Problem is, you can't make God disappear, and their conscience still testifies against them. And that is why they are a miserable lot. The following is a list of atheists and reasons that they give for not believing. I had an endless list of people. I'm only going to go through a couple. But as I read through their reasoning, I want you to test yourself, see if you can pinpoint what the emotional reason is for why they have become an atheist. Lawrence Bush, born in 1951, still living. He authored several books of Jewish fiction and nonfiction, including Waiting for God, The Spiritual Explorations of a Reluctant Atheist. He said, quote, "No matter how therapeutic religious observance might be for individuals, no matter how beguiling the symbols, metaphors, ceremonies, and community spirit, there is something about the surrender to God and to a prescribed worship tradition that simply offends my arrogant soul." What in his flesh is driving him to atheism? What do you think? What do you think? No. He tells you right at the end. What is it? Arrogance, pride. Okay? I will not have this man lead over me. I'm my own God. Earl Wild, 1915 to 2010, musician, classical pianist, considered a leading virtuoso of his generation, says he is against pianists who express concentration by leaning their heads back with their eyes closed. When you give a recital, God doesn't help you. Wild claims to be an atheist largely for musical reasons, having at age 10 asked his mother how there could be a God when the organist at their local church in Pittsburgh was so lousy. Has he rejected God because the facts demonstrate? No. That's an emotional reaction. Will Wright, he was a computer game designer and co-founder of the game development company Maxis, known for the 2008 game Spore. He said when Wright was 9, his father died of leukemia, and he moved in with his mother and younger sister to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. There he enrolled in the Episcopal High School and duly became an atheist. Somebody tell us, why did this guy reject God? What was it? Father died from leukemia. Who's in control of that? God is. But I don't like what God did, therefore I'm going to throw my fit and I'm going to deny his existence. Eliezer Yudkowsky, artificial intelligence designer. Artificial intelligence researcher concerned with the singularity and an advocate of friendly artificial intelligence. So here's a modern guy. When I heard on the phone that Yehuda, whoever Yehuda is, I don't know if he's a friend or a family member, had died, there was never a moment of disbelief. I knew what kind of universe I lived in. How is my religious family to comprehend it, working as they must, from the assumption that Yehuda was murdered by a benevolent God? Why is this guy rejecting God? Do the facts give him that? Or, Yehuda, whoever that is, died and he doesn't like it. Verse 26, back to Romans 1. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. Guys, catch this. You're going to have a woke community all around you telling you that Romans 1:26 does not tell you what it's telling you. It says, for this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. 27. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. Men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. It's fascinating how the first profound manifestation of a soul that has been given over to false worship is in the person's sexuality. You'll see it all the time. Specifically, perverse sexuality that goes against God's design for it. The world of sexuality, the area of sexuality, has such a strong pull that when people engage in something that they want to engage in, that God has identified as an abuse of that gift that he's given mankind, they don't want to let go of it, and they'd rather dispense with God. Just to go back to some of the crazy things I experienced with my atheist professors, I had a professor who described an LSD trip that he went on once where, and if you don't know what LSD is, it's a hallucinogenic. It makes you see things, hear things, smell things, taste things that really aren't there. It just kind of plays with your brain and makes you sense things. He said he's standing in front of the mirror in his underwear, and his belly button became an eyeball. And the eyeball started to grow until he was completely an eyeball. And then his shoes started to chase him around the house. Okay? Now, here's a professor. Is that an intelligent thing to do? No. But there's an attempt to experience sensationalism, feed the senses, and that's exactly what he was doing. I had another professor who, this guy was heavily involved in the homosexual community. He let everybody know it. He was very proud of it. I had him for 2 classes, and a few years after I graduated, he died from AIDS. Receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. I had another professor who committed suicide. Tried to hang himself in a stairwell, the cord broke, and he fell, breaking his neck on the stairs on the way down. I had a bunch of professors who were just angry, nasty, mean people. And what are you left with? If you think that you are a cosmic accident and you've got no purpose, and then what you do in order to make yourself happy and you try to appease yourself, it's all through the senses. And God never designed the senses to bring us fulfillment. And when we keep trying to appease ourselves through physical fulfillment, we find out that it doesn't work. So then we turn to harder stuff, or we eventually throw in the towel and say, God, get me out of this. So, since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. Now keep in mind, professors, college professors, they not only do these things, but they give approval to those who practice them. And my professors were hedonistic evangelists. They got their PhDs and they came into my classroom so that they could convince me that God doesn't exist and that I should live the lifestyle that they're living. Some of the most aggressive evangelists that I have known have been atheists, and I've seen them invest everything they have to become the gods of the universities so that they can proselytize as many students as they can with their message and their influence. Merry Christmas, that's what you're headed into. Hope you're ready. Why would someone who believes in nothing put so much into making sure everyone else believes in nothing? Because guilt over sin is a reality, whether they believe in it or not. And it's a powerful thing. There is this false notion that getting more and more people to engage in my sin will make my sin more acceptable and appease my conscience. And it's not just the atheist that seeks out an audience to follow him. Often it is the audience that seeks out the atheist to give them what they want, even in the church community. 2 Timothy 4:3 says, "For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but have itching ears. They will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions." We've got a way that seems right to us. There's a way that seems desirable to us, and we will force our universe to conform itself and synchronize with what we want. Why is the atheist so miserable? Because they live with their sin and function in ways that are antithetical to the way that they were created. And because their attempt to forget about their sin by erasing God and by getting others to join them in their sin compounds that misery. As I said at the beginning of the message, no one is an atheist because the evidence supports this belief. Atheism is a choice, usually a choice that has been birthed not in the intellect, but rather in the emotions. I believe the agnostic at least has some grounds to stand on in that they acknowledge that there is a God, but they're just not sure who he is. The atheist is claiming that there is no God, which is very arrogant and ignorant in its claim to make, at least from an intellectual position. One would have to have traversed the entire universe with not only physical perception, but spiritual perception, and eliminated every possible hiding place that God could be in so that they could claim with absolute certainty that there is no God. But the atheist does just that. Okay? Now, if you detect some strong emotion in what I had to say there, please understand it's not directed at you. It's directed at the individuals who are going to try to get a hold of you and convince you that there is no God. So, anyway, we've got a couple minutes left. Are there any questions that were surfaced by what we just examined? When you get to college, or when you get to ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN, and you listen to these people who are highly educated talking about this or that, and they start to say things that make fun of Christians, that degrade the Bible, that tear apart the church, that make us look like a bunch of idiots, know that that's not coming from a base of knowledge of true facts. That's coming from an emotional base. Guys, get that. Because if you believe that they're hanging on to something because it's intellectually supportable, you'll start to doubt what you believe. These are people who have been hurt by life, and they've responded to it by rejecting the God that they blame. Okay? And we can still have compassion for them. We can still love them. We can be patient. We can talk to them about Christ. We can love them. We should. But don't let them convince you that they know more than you know. What they know is a design of their own creation. Okay?